The royal guard stood motionless, his face a mask of discipline as crowds of tourists snapped photos. For 8 hours each day, he maintained perfect stillness, until the moment a small wheelchair approached. The crowd fell silent as a boy with an impossible dream came into view. No one expected what happened next. As the boy struggled to rise from his wheelchair, the guard made a choice that would change both their lives forever. This isn't just a viral video. It's the story of how Walter and Guard Stevens found strength in each other's weakness. If you were moved by this incredible moment, don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartwarming stories like this one. Your support means the world to us. What drives a 10-year-old boy in a wheelchair to travel across London to see the Royal Guards? The answer lies in a story that began long before Walter's wheels ever touched the pavement leading to Buckingham Palace. Inside his modest bedroom, the walls told the story of his fascination. Royal Guard photos taped carefully at eye level, books stacked neatly on his nightstand, and a small model of a guardsman that served as his nightlight. Before the accident, Walter had been like any other child, running through parks, climbing trees, and dreaming of adventures. That changed on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when a car slid through an intersection. The medical terms were complex, but the prognosis was devastatingly simple. He'll never walk again. The words echoed through the hospital hallway, shattering more than just Walter's physical abilities. They fractured his family as well. "My husband couldn't handle it," Catherine would later explain, her voice tight with restrained emotion. "He said he wasn't built for this kind of responsibility." She never spoke of him with bitterness, only a quiet acceptance that had formed over the years of his absence. While one parent disappeared, the other became both mother and father, nurse and cheerleader, provider and protector. Each night, Catherine would pause outside Walter's door, watching as he practiced. Despite his confinement to the wheelchair, Walter's discipline was remarkable. He'd position himself in front of his mirror, adjusting his posture with military precision, perfecting head turns and salutes. These were Walter's sacred moments of standing tall without leaving his chair. School brought different challenges. "How's a cripple going to be a guard?" classmates would taunt. "They don't have wheelchairs at the palace." Walter never wavered. "You don't understand what being a guard really means." He would return home and resume his practice with even greater determination. The physical therapy sessions were brutal tests of endurance. Medical professionals maintained their cautious approach. "We don't want to encourage false hope," they would say, within Walter's earshot. What they didn't know was that sometimes Walter felt strange tingling sensations in his legs. Phantom sensations, he called them, in his private journal, afraid to voice the hope they represented. Catherine worked extra shifts, cleaning offices and taking in mending. The savings grew slowly, but purpose gave strength to her tired hands. Walter needed to see the real guards, and she was determined to make it happen. "We're going to Buckingham Palace," she announced one evening. Walter's face transformed with joy. The morning of their journey dawned clear. Walter dressed in his best clothes and practiced his salute one final time. "Ready?" Catherine asked, her hand on the door. Walter nodded, his expression solemn with purpose. As Walter nodded with solemn purpose, another soul stood rigid behind the palace gates. Guard William Stevens maintained his legendary stillness, a living statue whose perfect posture betrayed nothing of the storm that raged within. For 7 years, 3 months, and 12 days, he had carried his grief like the ceremonial rifle in his white-gloved hands. With precision, control, and a weight that threatened to crush him with each passing hour. Stevens' reputation among the Queen's Guard was unmatched. In 15 years of service, he had never broken his stance during extreme weather or tourist provocations. His commanders recognized his exceptional discipline, even when faced with physical pain during his duties. What his fellow guardsmen didn't know was that this unwavering discipline was penance. Every evening after his shift, Stevens would return to his small flat in East London, where silence greeted him like an old enemy. The modest home held remnants of his former life, photographs stored away, a wedding ring gathering dust, and a bedroom door that remained perpetually closed. Behind it lay his son James' preserved world. Royal Guard figurines, military history books, and an unworn child-sized guardsman uniform. The rainy night 7 years ago haunted him constantly. Stevens had chosen duty over his son's school play. "I'll make the next one," he had promised James. Hours later, while Stevens stood at attention, the car carrying his family hydroplaned. James died instantly. His wife survived physically, but emotionally shattered. "I can't look at you anymore," she had said months later, departing with devastating finality. Stevens' grief calcified into a fortress of perfect duty, never deviating, never failing, never disappointing again. If he stood straight enough, marched precisely enough, perhaps he might atone for his absence when his family needed him most. That morning, as tourists gathered to watch the guards, Stevens stared ahead with practiced indifference. A movement caught his eye, a wheelchair approaching, carrying a boy whose posture seemed unusually erect. The child studied Stevens with an intensity that stirred something deep in the guardsman's memory, the same focused gaze James had shown when practicing salutes in their garden. As the boy wheeled closer, Stevens heard a woman explaining her son's condition. "The doctor said he would never walk again after the accident," she said, "but Walter has never accepted that." Stevens felt his throat tighten beneath his high collar. The boy would have been James' age exactly, with the same unwavering fascination with the guards. For the first time in 7 years, a crack formed in the fortress of Stevens' grief. Not weakness, but recognition that transcended duty and protocol. While the fortress of Stevens' grief had weathered 7 years without a single breach, as Walter wheeled directly toward him, something more powerful than royal protocol hung in the balance. The air around them seemed to thicken with anticipation as Walter positioned his wheelchair precisely at the invisible boundary visitors were not permitted to cross. The metal brakes clicked into place with a sound that cut through the courtyard. Tourists quieted, conversations fading to silence. "Sir," Walter began in a clear voice, "I know you can't answer me. That's okay. I wanted you to know that I understand what it means to stand for something greater than yourself." Catherine watched her son from a few feet away, hands clasped tightly. She'd seen this determination during therapy sessions when Walter pushed beyond expectations. She knew better than to intervene. "Today feels different," Walter continued softly. "I can feel something in my legs that the doctor said I would never feel again." He placed his hands firmly on the armrests. "And today, I'm going to stand, just like you." The crowd grew completely still as Walter locked his brakes. His jaw clenched with concentration as he began to push himself upward. Years of therapy had built remarkable strength in his upper body, strength now channeled into what medicine deemed impossible. Stevens remained motionless, but his eyes tracked every movement. Behind his ceremonial facade, memories of James practicing similar expressions flickered like an old film. Walter's face contorted with effort. His arms trembled violently. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his labored breathing audible in the silent courtyard. "My doctor said neuroplasticity means the brain can find new pathways," Walter managed through gritted teeth. "I believe mine has." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as Walter's body slowly rose. His knees trembled visibly beneath his trousers. Catherine took an instinctive step forward, torn between protection and respect. "A guard stands because something inside won't let him fall," Walter said, voice strained but steady. In that miraculous moment, Walter achieved a full standing position. His legs shook but held. Then, emboldened, he attempted a step forward. His right foot lifted slightly before his balance betrayed him, pitching him toward the stone courtyard. For Stevens, time slowed. 15 years of protocol balanced against the life of a child who reminded him painfully of James. Within Stevens' mind, a clock frozen in grief for 7 years began ticking again. As Walter began to fall, Stevens faced his defining choice: remain the statue duty demanded, or catch a boy whose courage had just shown him what truly standing tall meant. The sound of metal hitting stone echoed across the courtyard as Stevens' ceremonial rifle clattered to the ground. Protocol dictated absolute stillness. Yet in that fraction of a second, something more powerful than duty commanded his body to move. 15 years of perfect discipline shattered in an instant of profound humanity. "I've got you, son," Stevens whispered, his arms wrapping securely around Walter as he caught the boy mid-fall. Those 5 words broke through the fortress of silence he had built around himself. The crowd gasped, stunned by the sentinel suddenly springing to life. As Stevens held Walter against his chest, the rigid guardsman's face crumpled, tears streaming down his cheeks. Walter looked up and touched Stevens' face with a small hand. "Why are you crying?" Walter asked softly. For a moment, Stevens saw his son's face superimposed over Walter's, the same curious eyes, the same gentle touch. His voice cracked as he spoke. "My son James, he was your age when I lost him. I chose my post over being there when he needed me most. Every day since then, I've stood at attention, thinking perfect service might somehow atone for that failure." Walter absorbed the guardsman's confession, his eyes reflecting understanding beyond his years. "No guard should ever be ashamed of doing the right thing," he said firmly, his voice steady despite his trembling legs. Catherine watched transfixed as this unexpected connection unfolded between her son and the royal guard, who knelt on the stones of Buckingham Palace courtyard, protocol abandoned for human connection. Stevens looked at Walter with new resolve. "Would you like to try again?" he asked. "I could teach you to walk, as a guard in training." Walter's face lit up. Stevens positioned himself at the boy's side, one arm supporting Walter's elbow, the other hand steady against his back, creating the kind of mentorship relationship that can have profound therapeutic effects. "The first rule of being a royal guard," Stevens explained as he helped Walter find his balance, "is to know when to stand alone and when to accept support from your fellow guards." The words carried deeper meaning than mere instruction on posture. Catherine covered her mouth as Walter took his first tentative step with Stevens' support. Each movement challenged medical certainty, showcasing remarkable resilience through emotional support. "One step at a time," Stevens encouraged. "That's it, just like a proper guardsman." By the time they crossed 10 feet, Walter's face shone with exhausted triumph, and Stevens' posture had transformed from rigid formality to something genuinely strong, the stance of a man who had found purpose beyond protocol. Before returning to his post, Stevens arranged weekly guard training sessions that would incorporate therapy with ceremonial movements. As Walter sat back in his wheelchair, Stevens bent to whisper words of gratitude for the unexpected gift he had received. The shadow of Buckingham Palace stretched long across the courtyard as the sun dipped below London's skyline. In that unscripted moment between Walter and Stevens, something profound had transpired, something that transcended medical charts and military protocols. Their bond revealed a truth often overlooked. Human connection mends what medicine cannot touch. Like the palace stones weathered by centuries yet standing strong, these two broken souls found strength in each other. The walls had witnessed countless ceremonies, but none as meaningful as this quiet exchange between a wounded boy and a grieving man. In years to come, tourists would photograph the guards in scarlet tunics, never knowing which one had taught us that true courage isn't measured by maintaining formation, but by knowing when to extend a hand. Sometimes strength wears a uniform, sometimes it sits in a wheelchair, but always it recognizes itself in another.